Hi, guys. Good to see you as we start our before the show. It's nice to see so many of you on noon on a Thursday. I know it's not the most convenient time, and I was trying to figure out what would be just the right thing that would work out for you and also enable us to hit this day and mark this moment in a really uh, interesting and unique way. So I'm excited to see you. Um, I am wearing, you know, brighter lipstick because I'm French now. I'm Oui, bonjour. That's I didn't learn that much. I see we have Barbara who's speaking very good French on our chat. Susan, great to see you from College Station, and Elizabeth on the road between Fort Worth and Houston. That's quite a drive. So hopefully we'll keep you company on this. I'm excited about today. I have some apprehensions too. I just got back from Normandy. You're going to hear me talk about this. I just got back. I don't think it's been 48 hours. And there is so much information. It's completely overwhelming intellectually, emotionally, physically. The whole trip was much different than I expected in many ways. Of course, we had our 3 kids with us too. So that's also a factor. Um, but I feel like I'm really excited to report to you what we've learned, but also feel some apprehension in making sure that it stays organized. I've also set a record in this program that we're using called StreamYard. I can only load 10 videos at a time. I didn't realize that because I've never tried to do that. And so I'm going to have to erase the video in the middle of our broadcast to include one more, our final one that we're going to play right before we leave today. So, does anyone have any questions or thoughts before we get started? I'm going to grab one name here that I realize I don't have. And then we're going to go from there. Has anyone been watching the live events from Normandy this morning? Honestly, I have no idea how they're able to pull this stuff off. You guys, this area is so it's very rural. Logistically, it's very hard to travel. I don't know how they bring in that many important VIPs into one area and get them in and out and do it in a way that makes sense. I really don't. It's amazing. Okay, Aubrey, good to see you. Melissa, Jeremy. Always see Jeremy representing from Oklahoma. All right, here's what we're going to do. Because I'm not quite sure, we're going to probably play some different music kind of leading into this on the podcast. By the way, you're seeing all the footage that I have, a lot of it that social media will see over the next several days. But I want to show you it to you first. So I have some interviews that I'm going to play, and we're going to kind of go about this broadcast in a different way. So I know some of you may have to come in and out. If you have questions, let me know. And I'm kind of going to divide this up into almost like 4 different sections for us. So that way, if you need to leave and come back, you kind of know where you are. And I hope it's a good way to organize this. Jenna, great to see you. Jacqueline from DC, great to see you too. So I'm going to put on let me just check my audio. And you guys are my producers because you tell me if things are working. And I am going to play a countdown clock for 30 seconds. And then we're going to get started. Thanks, you guys. I appreciate seeing you. I'm really excited. Okay, let's do this. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Smarter News and to our special report on the 80th anniversary of D-Day. I just returned from Normandy, France for my very first time on the ground at these historic sites that represent a story for America and, quite frankly, for the rest of the world that continues to inspire and inform us decades later. There were so many different lessons learned from walking the different battlefields in Normandy, the different beaches, and there's an overwhelming amount of information. But I really wanted to take some time to talk to you today about D Day and why it matters, and do it in a way that I hope will be really accessible for all of us. One of the great gifts that you have given me at Smarter News, I am so grateful to you for, is this opportunity to revisit different historic events with the eye of a journalist rather than, let's say, an eye of a student or an eye of someone that just has a hobby or an interest. And approaching these topics with a journalism background has invited me to sift through them in a way that I would not have done otherwise. If you said to me, do you know something about D Day a couple years ago? I would say, sure. D Day is a really important day in World War II. And it was a really important battle, and many people lost their lives. It was particularly dangerous. And it did change the course of the war. I probably could give you a very superficial understanding of D Day. I'm sure most of us can. What I want to do today is equip us to go a few levels deeper so that from this point on, we all know something about D Day that makes us a little bit smarter about it. And I think these different facts that I learned by walking the ground there will help inform us for years to come, not just about this one event, but also about the way this one event changed the American story. What I'm noticing today on the 80th anniversary is we have a lot of commemorations, and appropriately so, of those who made the ultimate sacrifice, of those who fought during this time. The 80th anniversary is really important, not just because it's a round number, but because many believe this will be the final anniversary where we will have veterans that actually participated in the D Day initial landings present in Normandy. And many of them are 100 years old or even older. So, this is why there's also increased attention. It's 80 years from that date, and many of these service members were young when they were part of this initial landing. I just want to share this anecdote because I think this will help place us in what we know about D-Day and what we don't. I really wanted to get one fact for you going to Normandy. Quite frankly, I wasn't sure this trip was going to happen. My husband was invited to an event. My husband is a combat veteran, and there was a special event that he was going to participate in. It's an 80K ruck. So that's a hike when you're carrying a backpack. And 80K, obviously, for the 80th anniversary of D Day, that's 50 miles. And he was going to participate with a group of his friends. Nothing quite worked out according to plan, but he ended up doing this event. And I thought this is such a unique opportunity to go. Let's go ahead and go and bring our kids, and I'll report for Smarter News. And this will be a really important time for our family in a few different ways, professionally and personally. So going into this trip, I was a little reluctant to over prepare because as everyone knows, there's a lot of moving parts with travel. So I was a little bit concerned about that, but I was looking for a couple key facts that I could equip myself with so that I would land in Normandy and really understand some of the key numbers that I'm going to report back to you. And one of the key things that I wanted to share with you was what was the average age of a soldier who landed on D-Day? Someone must know that, right? 20, right? So if they're 20 years old, it's the 80th anniversary, they could be 100 years old. Okay, that would make sense. Are they 19? Was it 25? Stephen Ambrose placed it around the mid 20s, those that participated in this particular part of history. 25, 26 years old, Stephen Ambrose being the famous historian and writer. I contacted our National World War II Museum that's based in New Orleans. Fabulous museum. If you have a chance to go there, you got to check it out. And I reached out to a historian there because I couldn't find this data point. I thought I must be wrong. Someone must know this. Someone has a spreadsheet on this, right? Someone must know the age. Never got a response, got pushed off, got delayed, got told that there was no one available. And I never learned that fact. I don't have that fact to share with you. And I was getting really focused on it because I wanted to be able to share with you, this is how young these service members were and who did such extraordinary things. I thought that would really help. But you see, I was looking for a fact to try to give me some control over an event that was so big and wide and difficult to wrap my arms around that I was getting hyper focused on that. And one of the things that the museum notes, and I'm looking at this from a data sheet that I'm going to share with you today, and I'm going to read this to you. It is important to note that many of the numbers associated with with the D-Day assault forces and their casualties are approximations. Did you know that? They're approximations. And some sources vary widely. As Stephen Ambrose observed, quote, no exact figures are possible either for the number of men landed or for casualties for D Day alone. That, in and of itself, is news to me because it just shows us how the story is difficult for many to wrap their arms around. But that's what we're going to do different today. We're going to take this story, we're going to learn the basics of what we should know, and then I'm going to share with you some reflections and some of the interesting people that I met along the way. So we're going to divide this report into four different sections. One is the basics, like what are the basics informations that we should know? And the second part is going to be what did I learn on the ground, the not so basic facts that you really had to be there to understand that will give us even a deeper knowledge of D-Day. And then we're going to talk about some of the interesting encounters and finally just some reflections as far as being there. D-Day uh, in and of itself is a changing point in history. In many parts of our life, we maybe have chance meetings, right? Something happens when you cross the street, you're in a grocery store, and your life is suddenly changed forever. There are other moments in your life where you realize that the decision you make at that point in time will put you on a completely different course. And D Day was that sort of situation in time. It was a moment in time where we knew going in, whatever happened would change the course of world history. The hope would be that we are successful, but we weren't entirely sure we would be. And we weren't entirely sure how this operation was going to play out because it wasn't just about D Day. It was also about the days, the weeks, and the months that followed. So let's approach D Day with that perspective. The stakes are incredibly high. We're in the midst of World War II. We hear this expression here during the election cycle of our 2024 elections of people saying that the world is on fire. We hear that a lot right today. But in 1944, the world was indeed on fire. There were different war fronts all over the place, including in the Pacific. But we're really going to turn and we're going to focus on Europe because Europe at this time was completely overrun by Hitler and Nazi Germany. And I want to show you a map that gives you an idea of what exactly things look like in Europe at this particular time. So this map shows the areas of Europe under German control in 1942. This would be more or less around the height of Hitler's power. You can see almost the entire continent of Europe is covered with orange, which suggests that this is controlled by Nazi Germany. And then you see parts of North Africa as well. This is a really key map to understand because it gives you the idea of the reach, but also the resources that the Germans were needing to continue their advance. And Hitler wanted to continue to take over land. I mean, he was a madman, a dictator. Uh, he was evil in so many different ways. And his mission was to make sure that he took over more and more of the free world so that it would no longer be the free world anymore. So, as we're looking at this map, another important thing to point out though is after 1942, so we're getting into 1943, there's been a conversation that's taking place with the United States, the Brits, the Canadians as well. The Allies, by the way, involved many other countries, but I'm going to focus on the three countries, Great Britain, the United States, and Canada, because those were the ones involved in D-Day. There's a conversation about how how do we confront Hitler? How do we push him back? How do you beat him? What does it actually look like? There were weaknesses. He didn't have the same industry as the United States, didn't have exactly the same resources, and he was really busy. He wanted to go into Africa and he wanted to go into Eastern Europe. So he was spread thin and he wasn't doing well. As he gets further into the 1940s, he's not quite as successful as he once was. He's pushed back from Eastern Europe. And then you have the Allies going into Italy. So he's getting, not that he's getting surrounded, but he's getting kind of pushed now instead of this wild expansion that we experienced of Nazi Germany just suddenly proliferating along the continent of Europe and beyond. Now he's getting squeezed a little bit. And this thinking of, well, maybe there is an opportunity here for us to go in and start really putting pressure on what we believe is not a stable government and does not have the support of the people that they are conquering. what is that going to look like? What is that operation actually going to look like? And this is where the operation for D-Day really started to be developed. And the operation overall was called Operation Overlord. So it wasn't, we talk about D-Day being the moment in time on June 6, 1944, but the overall operation is Operation Overlord. And I want to show you the map for that. This involves this involves 5 different landing points for the Allies. And if I could go back to the last map that we used, this is really important. Hitler knew something was going on, and he had built what was called the Atlantic Wall. He knew that there was going to be some sort of attack coming his way, but the Germans didn't really know where. Where could it come from? Could it come from Norway or Sweden, kind of up closer towards Denmark? Could it come from Great Britain, but closer to Belgium? And especially this one area called Calais, which was an area that was most close from France to Great Britain. And there was a lot of fighting there in the past. And because it was such a strategic location, there was this thinking, no, if an invasion comes, it's going to come kind of in this northeast part of France. But Hitler was mistaken because the Allies thought we're not going to go there. That's the obvious place. We're going to pretend that we're going to go there. And there was actually a huge operation to use basically like phony information, propaganda, to make the Germans believe we were going somewhere else. But we were actually looking towards Normandy, the coastline of Normandy, which was further towards the west. It was rural. It wasn't that the Germans weren't there, but they weren't quite there as much as they were closer to what would be more Central Europe. And so the thinking was, this is such a key area. It has ports. So if we can get control of it, then we can start moving men and machinery much more easily. Resources can come into this area. It has a network of roads that's really important. These roads lead to bigger towns that, again, are of strategic importance, and then they lead to Paris. So logistically, this made a lot of sense. And the thinking was, this is a big, long beach. We're going to send the United States into one part of the beach, Great Britain and Canada into another part of the beach. And we're going to move in. We're going to try to overwhelm the Germans, and we're going to move in and try to capture these key towns. And there was going to be a few different ways we're going to try to do this. It wasn't just going to be from the sea. Remember, it's often described, D-Day is described as one of the largest military invasions in military history. So the numbers were important. We're going to overwhelm as much as we can using everything available to us. The Germans don't have a navy like us. They don't have planes like us. We're going to build up and prepare and train for this moment. And that's actually what took place. The thinking was that D-Day was going to happen at least by mid-July. And there was a small window of time where the weather could agree, because there was sort of 2 parts to this operation, at least the beginning of this operation. There were the paratroopers that were going to lead first, and they were going to be dropped behind enemy lines. And once they were on the ground, then we were going to storm the beaches. The paratroopers that are dropped in are going to start clearing as much as they can the Germans, so that we don't face as much fire from the beaches. The beaches are going to be where the big ships are going to come in, and things that we really need. We're going to be able to drop more men in higher amounts if we can clear those beaches. So it was a numbers game as much as anything else. And so you had these 2 parts of this invasion. You probably have heard that D-Day was supposed to happen on June 5th, that it had to be delayed because of weather. And I can speak to that now, having been there. The weather is very tricky. I'm from San Francisco, California, where it's foggy and cold and windy, where other parts of the area can be suddenly sunny and bright blue skies. Normandy's sort of like that. It rained on us almost every single day. It was cloudy and windy. And then it would sort of clear up all of a sudden. And you'd have these moments of these clear, beautiful skies and think this is the most magical place on the planet. And then suddenly the clouds would come in and it was over for you in a very dramatic way. So this is what the Allies were confronting. And June 6th provided that opening. We needed to make sure it was a clear night for the paratroopers, and we needed to make sure the tides were correct. All these things had to come together for this huge invasion to take place. And that's what happened on June 6th. So the paratroopers come in, they land behind enemy lines. I was actually able to see some demonstrations of what this would look like. These planes had to fly very low to the ground because the paratroopers were were being dropped in a way that was allowing them um, to use their parachute in a certain way, just to kind of speak sort of generally. So they're using a static line. So they're jumping out and they're not very high off the ground, but there's also the hope that when a plane is suddenly directly over you, perhaps you don't get hit by the fire from the ground. It's not like seeing a plane way in the distance coming your direction. So these planes come in, they drop the paratroopers, and the paratroopers face a lot of challenges right away. In certain parts of Normandy, the fields have been flooded, and the paratroopers have so much gear on them that some of them drown in these farm fields that have been flooded because they're weighted down by so much gear. But many of them land off site where they're supposed to land, and they have to figure out how to regroup. So in the early hours of June 6th, that's what's happening behind enemy lines. At this time in France, you have very little night. The sun sets, later in the evening. It doesn't get dark till like 10:30 in the evening. And then it gets light before 5 o'clock. So you have this very small window. So the paratroopers in the dark of night are trying to figure out how to come together. And then you have the invasion that's coming in off the beaches. The Americans are going to go into Utah and Omaha. And then there's the three other beaches, Gold, Juno, and Sword, that the Canadians and the Brits are going to go in. I was able to stand on Omaha Beach, and I learned something very interesting walking in this particular area that I wanted to make sure to share with you. Hi guys, I'm on Omaha Beach in Normandy, France, and this is one of the sites of the D-Day invasion. And this particular area was really important for me to see and share with you, because this is the place where that famous photograph was taken that so many of us likely associate with D-Day. You'll know the one is with a group of American soldiers. They're in a vessel called a Higgins boat, and the hatch is down, and they're getting ready to launch onto the beach, and what looks like into complete and total chaos. We know what happened that day. We know it was a particularly deadly day for America. We lost just about as many Americans that day as we did the entire war in Afghanistan, the entire 20-year war. And this photograph represents to us how dangerous that day truly was. But here's something I've learned being here. That photograph is important, it is poignant, it is historic, but it only tells part of the story. With each subsequent landing, America fares better. And eventually American forces are able to gather themselves on the beaches and launch a successful campaign against Nazi Germany, which ended up victorious. So that photograph, as important it is to so many of us, it only tells us part of the picture. And learning the rest of the story is why I'm here in Normandy, France, for the 80th anniversary of D-Day. So that's an example of something that didn't dawn on me until I was there and understanding the subsequent waves of landings that took place. The initial landing on Omaha specifically was incredibly deadly for Americans. You're talking about 2,400 people that were killed, which, again, according to that statistic, and that's not to take away anything from those killed in the wars that happened after World War II, it's just for perspective. To have so much death on a single day is so different than we experienced in the war in Afghanistan, where it was spread out over several decades. And there was a reason for that, which I'm going to share with you in just a moment. This is a good timeline of what actually happened on D-Day. So in the early mornings, you see the paratroopers are coming in around 5 a.m. You have the naval vessels that are landing, and you start moving at around 6:30 in the morning, where you have Americans going into Utah and Omaha. You have more than 700,000 troops landing in Normandy on D-Day. 700,000 of them. And so in order for that to happen, you had to have had an improvement along the morning. So the early morning is incredibly bad. It's incredibly deadly, but the picture does start to improve. And the US forces, along with our allies, find a way. They find a way. And that's one of the key things to know about what happened on the beaches that day. Omaha and Utah are not very close together. It takes about over an hour to drive between the two of them. And that's, again, something I wouldn't realize unless I was there, which was the beaches are spanned a long way. Omaha Beach, you're talking about 5 miles of landing plus. And so here's a little something from Utah Beach because I want you to see Utah Beach compared to Omaha Beach. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we learned.
Hi guys, I'm on Utah Beach in Normandy, France. This is one of two landing sites on D-Day for American soldiers. You have Omaha Beach and then you have Utah Beach. Utah Beach looks much different than Omaha Beach. It's a big, wide, open beach with these rolling sand dunes that go straight into French farmland. It's much different than Omaha Beach where you have those big cliffs rising by the water, which gave Nazi Germany such an advantage on U.S. soldiers. I've been thinking a lot about the people that served during World War II. Just under 18 million Americans served during that time. About 40% of them volunteered, but just over 60% of them were drafted. They spent just under 3 years on average serving during World War II. About half of that time was spent abroad. And you have to think about it, so many of these service members were young, and their very first time in Europe comes during the D-Day invasion, where they step onto French soil with the mission of beating back Nazi Germany and liberating Europe. You have to think about what that must have been like for them.
And we see a picture of their amazing faces ahead of the invasion. One of the corrections I have to add there is that for officers, they earned about $200, about $3,500 in today's money. But for enlisted men, you were talking about just over $70, which is about $1,200 in today's money. So they weren't earning an incredible amount of money as serving as part of the military. But there was a united cause that Hitler was evil and that we had to confront evil in this particular way. And so these are the numbers that went onto the beaches that were part of the invasion. Nearly 160,000 Allied troops landed on D-Day, made up of major forces from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and 12 other Allied nations. Some 23,000 airborne troops jumped into Normandy from 822 aircraft and gliders. Over 34,000 Americans came ashore at Omaha alone on June 6th. On June 6th. So you can see right now there's even a little bit of a difference in numbers, can't you? We have 700,000 soldiers that have landed at a certain time. What was the time period for that? Was that D-Day plus one? Was it D-Day plus two? This is how we refer to the days after the D-Day invasion. What does D-Day even stand for? There are those that say D-Day just means day. D and day just means day. So it's almost like saying day. Eisenhower was asked later, General Eisenhower, of course, becomes president. He was asked about it. And he had a little bit different explanation where he said it's the day that you depart. So it was reference to the departure dates. The French apparently think it is disembarkment, but that's another area where there's not a lot of agreement. D-Day stands for something really important in our minds, but no one really agrees what the D in D-Day means. So that's an interesting fact to learn along the way too. As we're moving towards a few of the things that I learned being on the ground, I want to share with you an interesting perspective. I'm going to read from a work from Martha Gellhorn. Martha Gellhorn was a war correspondent, and she arrived on the D-Day beaches on a ship that was bringing a medical team. And she describes being on this ship, being with young women from different places across America. And one of the girls is actually painting her nails like a bright red as they're crossing the English Channel because they're all a little bit nervous. They weren't expecting to actually go this close to the coast. And this wasn't exactly the assignment that they thought they were going to receive. So because this is an interesting perspective, Martha Gellhorn was one of the few war correspondents. And by the way, believed to be the only woman war correspondent that was close at all to D-Day in any capacity. She's interviewing and observing the men that are coming on the boat. And so there's a couple different areas that I want to share with you. And I want to do that while I share some footage of what you see walking the streets in Normandy, France. Here's the first part, though. She writes this: on a deck in a bunk by the wall lay a very young lieutenant. He had a bad chest wound. His face was white and he lay too still. Suddenly he raised himself on his elbow and looked straight ahead of him as if he did not know where he was. He had a gentle oval face and wide blue eyes, and his eyes were full of horror, and he did not speak. He had been wounded the first day. had lain out in a field for 2 days and then crawled back to our line, sniped at by the Germans. He realized now that a German, badly wounded also in the chest, shoulder, and legs, lay in the bunk behind him. The gentle boy said very softly, because it was hard to speak, "I'd kill him if I could move." And that he did not speak for a long time. He was given oxygen and later operated on so that he could breathe. Imagine that. Imagine what that soldier saw, and that he was on a boat treated by Americans with a German right near him. Here's just an area in very close to Utah Beach. It's a little town. And these are little towns are all over the place that look exactly like this, with the old brick buildings and the beauty that the French countryside has. But I want you to think of the paratroopers walking into a town like this. Here's what some of them said. They spoke of the snipers, and there was endless talk about the women snipers. None of the talk very clear, but everyone believed it. There had been no French officers with these boys who could have interpreted, and the Americans never knew what the villagers were saying. Two men who thought they were being invited into an old woman's house to eat dinner were actually being warned of snipers in the attic. They somehow caught on to this fact in time. They were all baffled by the French and surprised by how much food there was in Normandy, forgetting that Normandy is one of the great food producing areas of France. They thought the girls in the villages were amazingly well dressed. Everything was confused and astounding. First, there were the deadly bleak beaches, and then the villages where they were greeted with flowers and cookies, and often by snipers and booby traps. So these are what Americans are telling to Martha Gellhorn. This is what the sort of chatter that she's overhearing, that they're going into these areas, and it's confusing the reaction. Who's the bad guy? Who's the good guy? They're being greeted, but they're also in danger. And so there's a lot of confusion associated with D-Day as well. This is a little part of the town. So what did we learn that could only be learned walking the beaches of Normandy? What would be some of the things that if you were there that you would notice? One of them was the proximity of the beaches and how they were very far apart. On a map, they sort of look close to each other, almost that you can gaze at the other one, but you're not close at all. And these were big, wide beaches. And often in some of these parts, the landings were a little bit off course. Because of that, the resources of the military were spread out, and there was a very key way that the Germans were preparing for this invasion that looked different than what we may expect in other areas. If you've ever been to a battlefield or a fort, you may see a big structure where a gun would be placed, and that gun often would be placed facing the water because that's where someone's going to come. So they're going to place it facing where someone's going to run in your direction. But that wasn't what the Germans did. They did something very smart. They built diagonally. They didn't want any sort of firepower coming from the water to go directly onto their guns or into the bunker. So they built diagonally so they could see an entire beach. And as they saw an entire beach, they had all sorts of weapons that they were using to attack the US soldiers, especially at Omaha. At Omaha, you have these, I don't want to call them cliffs. There are some cliffs, and there's some areas where there's just sort of a steep, sandy knoll, but it'll take your breath away to get to the top of it. And once you're at the top of it and you look down the beach, you can see the entire beach. And you can understand, if this beach is completely wide open, I have a clear line of sight to confront as many soldiers as I want. And this is why Omaha in particular was very dangerous. I have an interview with J.D. Hewitt. J.D. Hewitt is a high school history professor, but he's also the host of the Underground History channel on YouTube. And he has an incredible way of bringing history to life. He has been to Normandy. I believe this was his 8th trip. And I spent quite a bit of time with him on the ground, and he was really phenomenal to walk around this area with, because it's just so big, it's just so vast, and he's done it before. So he was able to take us to some of the key areas to talk about why they mattered. And so that's why I want to share with you this interview. We were standing at this German bunker, and he suddenly started talking. I said, JD, you got to hold on a second. I got to put a microphone on you because we need you to explain what we're seeing here. You still see the remnants of the guns. You still see the remnants of where the ammunition was stored. You see exactly how the Germans had the upper advantage. So here is J.D. Hewitt with us speaking at a German bunker right above Omaha Beach.
Right now, we are standing at Omaha Beach in the Easy Red sector. This is the place where on June 6th of 1944, the 16th Infantry Regiment of the 1st Infantry Division, also known as the Big Red One, made their landing. Each one of the beaches on D-Day have their own unique challenges. You go to Utah Beach, inland from there, the fields were flooded, so it narrows down the exits for the Americans. You go over to places like Sword Beach. There's the highest concentration of German bunkers in that area. Juno Beach, a lot of urban combat. Here at Omaha Beach, the big challenge is the terrain. You have the beach down here below us, and then there's this imposing, I guess you could call it a bluff, that the Americans are going to have to overcome in order to penetrate Hitler's Atlantic Wall. And when you're standing here in a place like this, it really gives you an appreciation for what the Americans had to overcome, because, I mean, you're definitely in a dominant position here. Each one of these Widerstand nests, or these resistance nests, are guarding an exit off of the beach. There were only 5 along Omaha Beach that the Americans had to overcome in order to penetrate this position. So this particular bunker is the twin to another bunker. Each one would have been holding a 75 millimeter artillery piece. And a lot of people, when they come to Normandy, they ask, why, if the invasion is coming from the English Channel, why is the bunker not pointed out in that direction? Why is it pointed off to the side? Well, what the Germans are trying to do is they're, one, trying to cover as much of the beach as they can. So this is offering flanking fire. And also, if your opening is facing the English Channel, well, you have the U.S. and the Royal Navy out there that can drop rounds right into your bunker. So if you look at this kind of a blast wing or a blast wall right here, what this is designed to do is to protect this gun inside of this bunker. So what we're looking at here is a position that is designed to cover as much of this beach as possible.
Do you know how many people would be inside here, JD? Like more than one person, or?
Yeah. So you would have a team that would be manning this position. As a matter of fact, when we get in here, we can learn a little bit more about how these guns operated. So here on the floor, you can see kind of where the gun could traverse from left to right.
Oh, I see. So these
Yeah. So if you look at these tracks, yeah, this is what they would do to move the gun from left to right. You can see right here where it took a direct hit from the Navy.
The good guys?
Yes, from the U.S. Navy. I can't remember what ship was responsible for this. And then some people ask, what these things are right here. When they were building these bunkers, the Germans would take up paper, roll it up, and they would put it into the wet concrete. And what that does is kind of breaks up the silhouette a little bit, breaks up the outline, so it's kind of a form of camouflage. There are other bunkers that you can go to. Crispec Battery is one that I can think of off the top of my head, where you see all of that on the outside. So even though it's dark in here, they, I guess, felt the need to try and, break up their outline a little bit in here.
Interesting. And then back there in these strange.
Yeah, so these little alcoves that you are looking at here. So they might be, I know that these right here are for ammunition storage, and I think that these are ammunition storage as well.
Where would the Germans live?
Would they come out? I mean, obviously they were manning this for
Yeah.
during the meeting, but
Yeah, so they would cycle in and out. There were there were some bunkers that were close by that they would sleep in. That way they could be kind of like a quick reaction force, get here quickly. And then if you go further inland, they would build it in like mansions, people's homes, things like that. They would take it over and stay there.
it's pretty wild to see the view that you get.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's a stunning view. And as we're coming out this side, well, here we can actually just walk out here a little bit further. So if you come out, you can see where we're on high ground, and then right over here it kind of drops off, okay, and then it's going to come back up. So these are what were called the draws. Okay, so this is the E3 draw. So the Americans are wanting to land and get their armor and trucks and things like that and use these exits because obviously you can't bring a tank up this bluff. So that's the spot that the Americans want to take and that the Germans are doing everything they can to defend. Right here, this is where the 1st Infantry Division lands. And just off to my left down here, you're going to have men like John Spaulding and Philip Strazak, who are going to come in with the 16th Infantry Regiment. They're going to be followed on by men like Joe Dawson, who was the commander of Company G. And these guys, there's a whole lot of confusion on D-Day, and what these men do is in this chaotic, stressful situation, they kind of rise above that and they start organizing these men and providing leadership here on the battlefield to get these guys off of the beach, because for most people, if someone's shooting at you, your impulse is going to be to hunker down. These guys are really instrumental in leading men off the beach and getting them off the bluff. So like Spaulding and Strazak and then Dawson are going to go up here and kind of pop out at where the American cemetery is today. And then at some point in there, they meet together, they form up a plan. Joe Dawson is going to go on to Colville, and then Spaulding and Strazak, along with the men who are with them, not just them by themselves, are going to kind of go down the bluff and hit another one of the Widerstand nests.
And so a nest like this, you said an interesting fact earlier, it was never taken from the front, that it would have been hit, could have been disabled, but really the success wasn't coming directly off the beach to the bunker. It was coming off the beach around and getting them from behind.
Yeah, here on Omaha Beach, where you really see a lot of the success is in the seams. These American soldiers kind of find these weak points. Germans didn't know that the attack was going to happen right here. So they're trying to guard the entire Atlantic coastline. And they've only got limited men, they've only got limited resources. So these Americans kind of find these points in between the strong points and kind of slip in and then move around. So again, Spaulding and Strazak are going to be doing that. Over on the Dog Green, Dog White sector, you have the leadership of Norman Cota, who is going to be leading them off the beach in one of these seams. It's not a full frontal attack overtaking these strong points. I think when you're talking about Omaha Beach and the misunderstandings that people have, one of the biggest misunderstandings is that the landings here at Omaha Beach were a disaster and that it was just a complete slaughter. Now, the first wave is bad. The second wave is a little bit better. The wave after that is a little bit better. What we find is that by mid-morning, we're making some headway here on the beach, and by mid-afternoon, people are coming off the landing craft and walking onto the beach. So is that a disaster or is that a success? I call that a success. Another misunderstanding that I've found in recent years is there's a tendency to try and assign godlike status to the men who were here. The men who are here were heroes. No doubt about it. I will not take that away from them, and they are worthy of praise. But they were just that. They were men. These were ordinary men who get put into an extraordinary situation and perform some extraordinary actions.
We thank JD for that perspective. It's really invaluable. You can see how the German positions gave them such an advantage, and then you can see the creativity of the American service members to figure out a way to get around, to sneak through these seams, as JD was talking about, and to actually get the Germans from a completely different direction. I had no idea that happened. I thought everything was directly forward. The American soldiers came on the beach, and yes, many of them were hurt or injured or worse, but then they were able to just plow along and confront the Germans face to face that way. That's not exactly what took place. There certainly was some of that at different points of the beach, but in many places, it was the Americans figuring out a way to kind of get around the Germans and then capture or kill them. And that's how, by the end of D-Day, you have tens of thousands of soldiers moving onto the beach. Again, the picture that we start with is different than the picture that we end with. And if we didn't end the day with an improved picture, this would have gone much, much different. So what happens then in the weeks that follow? When do we feel that we're going to win this thing? What does that look like? That is several weeks away. Just the fact that the Allies were able to get into Normandy was significant. But then they had to go through these towns and hold these key positions. Sometimes they would get to a particular town, hold the position, and the Germans would come back. And there was a special group of Germans that were trying to come back into Normandy and further confront the Allies. So there was a lot of fighting for many months. But as you get through summer, the Allies are able to get to Paris. And once the Allies are able to get to Paris, now this is a major victory. And suddenly the tide has changed against Hitler. And it was one of those dominoes that fell, that kept on falling, D-Day and beyond, that leads to the defeat of Hitler and Nazi Germany during World War II. There were many things I didn't expect being there in the Normandy region. And the first, as I've mentioned a few times, is logistically just how interesting this whole network of towns and roads truly continues to be. There are so many beautiful spots. There are so many different memorials to see. Almost every little town has a story of a paratrooper, an American soldier, some sort of battle that took place, some sort of monument that's being put up to honor a particular person, a particular time, a particular story. So it's very much embedded in the Normandy culture. One of you asked, and it's a great question, Jenna, did it feel heavy and reverent at all? What was the feeling of the land when you were there? It didn't feel dark. There are places that I've been that feel very dark, and there's an unsettled feeling walking through the towns or the sites. This is not the feeling in Normandy. It doesn't feel dark and heavy. And I wonder if I'll have more perspective on this as the weeks go on, if it's just because it's so beautiful and so idyllic in so many ways. But it doesn't feel, there's not this sort of shadow that's cast across the land. It doesn't feel that way. There were moments in the American cemetery at Omaha where I definitely had to choke back tears, because it's overwhelming to see the number of graves. Just over 9,000 soldiers are buried there. It's just an incredible number. And you think of all of these individuals that fought for freedom and for liberty in this particular area. So there was a sadness to that. But again, it was such a beautiful tribute to the soldiers. It doesn't feel dark or heavy. That's not that sort of haunted feeling. If you understand that, like that haunted feeling you get in certain places where there's so much sorrow and so much death, it doesn't feel like that. There's something different about Normandy. And perhaps that's one of the reasons too, that so many feel like they can go back there, because that shadow is not cast too long. There was a particular place, and now we're going to move to a few of the experiences that I had that I couldn't predict. there were some places where the entanglement of history with present day created a conflicting feeling. One of those areas was the site of a famous battle, and this famous battle was well documented in a series called The Band of Brothers, and it took place very close to a family home. And I was able to stand in a trench that the Germans were using that later the American soldiers overtook. And so let me show you that trench, and we're going to talk a little bit about this.
Hi guys, I'm standing in a trench here in Normandy, France. This is a trench that was used by German soldiers and then later used by American soldiers in a famous battle that took place here. The American soldiers were paratroopers from E Company of the 101st Airborne, and you might recognize that name because this was the group of soldiers that inspired Band of Brothers, the television series. In fact, that battle is documented in the series. Right as D-Day happens, as the paratroopers jump in, this is basically their next assignment. They have to clear this field where there are dozens and dozens of Germans that have set up major firepower in the area. And Easy Company has to take out the firepower because we have a whole bunch of Americans trying to come into this area and take this area away from the German Nazis. They're successful after several hours. And I learned of an interesting story here in this area. There is a family home right nearby. In fact, it's a working farm. And the family was actually living with the Nazis, not by choice, but the Nazis had taken over this entire area. And so the family is living on one floor, the Germans are living on another floor. And during the chaos of this battle, the family's 19-year-old son gets shot by an American paratrooper, gets shot in the back. He's evacuated to Utah Beach and also then evacuated to England, where he spends 8 months recovering. He returns to his family home and many years later launches the Utah Beach Museum that honors the service members of this period, including the American paratroopers. So an interesting twist of fate, an interesting connection, and just a reminder that the story doesn't just end on D-Day. There are stories that happen for the weeks and months later that remain developing stories to this day, as the family is still very active in preserving the stories and memories of these moments for future generations.
So one of the things that you can't see in the video, but sort of a funny thing to share is that that whole area is surrounded by electric fences because there's cattle that is using the land. And so as we were walking around the trenches, you had to kind of walk over and under these electric fences. So as I was walking doing that report, I was thinking about where I was standing because I didn't want to get zapped in the middle of it. Although compared to the story I was telling, that would be very minor. I was able to speak to the son of the man who was shot. And I was able to spend a little time with him. He showed me some photographs, and we had a really nice conversation in Brycourt Manor, which is right nearby this field. And it's this wonderful, beautiful old building that dates back hundreds of years. He was explaining how the families were living with the Nazis. I mean, can you imagine what that was like? You have your family with children on one floor. You're trying to maintain some sense of normalcy, but then on the bottom floor, the Nazis are operating and using your farm and your land as cover. And you know that there's an invasion that's going to take place. I was able to see an interview with the man that was shot, and he only apparently, according to his son, he only gave one interview. And he never talked about that. He never went into detail. In fact, it's never been established which paratrooper actually shot him. It was sort of in this chaos of war. He said that he went out of the manor. It was the same door that I had walked in. And he walked out, and the Germans were waving a white flag, and he's walking out because he wants them to know, I'm a French citizen. I'm a French citizen. My family's here. And he described how the paratroopers had their faces all blacked out. They were kind of gathering and smoking. And it wasn't this instant aggression. but then he was shot. They said, "Oh, come over here." And then they shot him. And that gives you a sense of how difficult it was to trust who was anybody, who was the enemy and who was friendly. But for that man to have that experience and then to have an injury that lasted him his entire life, his son talked about him not being able to use kind of part of his body as well as he would have been able to go on and create the Utah Beach Museum as a tribute to the Americans gives you an idea of the feeling in Normandy, the family connections. There's a family connection from generations down about what happened on D-Day and the weeks that followed. And there's clarity. There's not the anger of my dad got shot by these Americans. He should not have been shot. There is, how are we going to continue this legacy? And what are we going to do to continue the stories? And what a big deal this was for the Americans in this particular area to be successful. I don't want to take anything away from the Brits and the Canadians that also went into different towns. In that farmland that I was standing in, it's so green and lush, isn't it? You would never think that the sandy beaches are like 15 minutes away. It's right, the ocean is right there. And then you come right into French farmland. And that's something I wouldn't have expected. There's something else that I wouldn't have expected on D-Day, on the D-Day anniversary. And again, we were there a couple days before, and I was thankful for that because it was starting to get so busy. You weren't even able to move. You weren't able to even go simple distances because the towns all were shutting down their roads because they were having their own events. And so I was grateful, although I would love to broadcast live from like a French farm for you on this particular day. I was glad that we were there when we were, because you can see I was standing on the beach almost by myself. We're walking these areas almost alone. And then days later, everything changed. But even in the week before the D-Day anniversary, we were there just about under a week before it took place for several days. I was struck by how many people were driving around in World War II era Jeeps dressed as World War II soldiers. Like the full thing, the helmet, the packs, the boots, the whole thing, and not breaking from character. They are going in and out of the different sites. They may travel in groups. They may travel as individuals together. I had no idea that was going to happen, nor would I ever think about doing that myself. I thought, would I ever think about dressing up as, for example, a paratrooper? Like, probably not. So what is that about? So I was at a museum called the D-Day Experience. You're actually going to hear from the founder of this museum in a moment. And I saw this young couple. They're real cute together. And I thought, oh, they're dressed up. They're young. It's not just like older people doing this that could be, have like maybe a direct connection to D-Day. No. These are young people that are also doing it. And they were so cute. I noticed them. I was like, oh, that's a cute. They're a couple kind of going around. This must be a great time for them. I'm creating a story in my head. And then I saw them at Utah Beach. And I'll tell you, even after 20 years of being a journalist, it's still hard to walk up to strangers and be like, hey, can I ask you a question? No, what's your name? It's hard to do that. And I wasn't sure who they were or what they would react to. But I said, I got to ask them why. Like, why are they doing this? I could never have imagined the story that followed. And I don't want to give too much of it away. But David told a story of his grandfather. And what you should know about his grandfather, which he doesn't share here, we were talking afterwards, is that his grandfather immigrated to the United States at age 6. And he was working as an elevator, a lift operator, as David was describing, when Pearl Harbor happened. And he decided that he wanted to join the military. His brother was drafted, but he volunteered. He wanted to join. He did not arrive on D-Day, but in the days that followed, and he had a very key role. And so there was a reason why David put on this outfit. And so I want you to hear a little bit from David himself.
Can you just tell me your names?
My name is David Ralph Zamit.
Elisa Sherry.
And where are you from?
Malta, a small island in the Mediterranean.
Can you just tell me a little bit about the outfits that you have on today?
My outfit is a paratrooper, 101st Airborne paratrooper outfit. I have the Screaming Eagle badge under here because it's cold. The uniform was designed for paratroopers to jump behind enemy lines in World War II. So we could stop the German artillery from bombarding these beaches, these 5 beaches. We have 5 beaches: Gold, Juno, Omaha, Utah, and Sword Beach. We Americans, the artillery guns were set on Utah and Omaha, I believe. And this is a small part because we have a much more gear. For instance, my helmet here has the first aid pouch on the helmet because the helmet was a necessary tool that kept shrapnel, not bullets, from getting us killed.
Now, why did you decide to dress this way? Why was it important for you to come and dress this way?
My grandfather served in World War II. He came on this beach. That's why we're here today. And I feel honored and frankly to respect his memory here. That's why.
Tell me a little bit about your grandfather.
My grandfather served in an artillery unit that towed big guns. It's called the Long Tom. He towed it with a tractor. And on 7th June, when the Allies had all of the boats here and the surplus, they came on this beach and started going inland, so they could set up and have artillery fire the troops at the front of the lines.
Were you able to talk to your granddad about
No.
this service?
He passed away long before I was born, even before my mother and father were together.
Really? What does your father tell you about? Did he hear any stories from World War II?
Yes, not a lot. He kept a lot to himself, quite a lot.
Is it your first time here?
Yes,
How does it feel to be here?
honored. Honored, actually. The people here are very excellent. They welcome us with open arms. They wave to us. People like you come and talk to us. They want to take photos. So it's weird for some instance because you're going back to 80 years ago. You get me? War. It's not a lot of a picture that people want to remember. But for us to come here and they welcome us with open arms.
How does it feel to stand on the beach where your granddad was 80 years ago? I mean, what is that like?
Honored. I can't really talk about it because it's emotional. That's why. Never talked to the man, so I can't really know what was going on in his mind and never met him. This is the only part I have about him, and my father from his stories. This is the highlight. Right now, alone here on this beach.
So I'm getting teary-eyed just thinking about David and how in that moment where I said, "How does it feel?" and he just you could see that he had to catch himself because he was overwhelmed by emotion being there, and it was very heartfelt. And we've been in communication since that time. And he shared some more photos even today with me of his grandfather. And so there's a connection there. Again, a familial connection that is spanning different countries. His grandfather ended up going back to Malta and his father did as well. And so that's where David lives, but he was talking about America in a way that I haven't heard people talk about America in a long time, and how much he loves America, that he has an American flag up in his room and that he dreams of coming to America. And these were some of the voices that were surrounding us in these early days before all of the crowds came in for the 80th anniversary. I have one more thing to show you. So we have some people dressing up as are the kind of the famous fighters that were part of D-Day. But then you have something completely on the other end of the spectrum. And I'm going to let this play out a little bit, but I found myself in a different area, a town called Carrington. You're going to hear that in just a moment. And something unexpected took place, and I want you to see that as well.
Sound a lot more elegant, but Hi guys, I'm in a town called Carrington, which I spoke French. It would sound a lot more elegant. but I'm in a playground in the middle of this town, which is very near Utah Beach. Utah Beach is one of the historic landing sites for America on D-Day. This particular town, because of its size and strategic location, was one of the goals of the American soldiers and our allies. We wanted to come to Carrington and we wanted to take and hold this city that was obviously dominated by the German Nazis at the time. This was the site of incredibly fierce fighting and a lot of bloodshed. So to have my children here in the middle of this town playing on a playground in peace in this beautiful, idyllic area is such a contrast to what happened 80 years ago when you had fierce urban combat. There is a road going into this town, going in and out of this town, now called Purple Heart Lane, because so many lost their lives fighting to not only take over this town, but then hold it from the Germans who came back again, trying to get it back. And it's such an important reminder that we look at World War II as these isolated moments in time, for example, D-Day, but we don't think about the campaign Operation Overlord, which spanned months and months and months before the Allies really had victory, secured victory over Germany, over the Nazis. There are so many different ways that this community is celebrating. There's flags everywhere. There's like a fair. We're really close to sort of the center of town where there's a fair and there's outside carousels for the kids. You could hear, I don't know if you can catch this on my microphone, but there's a helicopter overhead. You have all these historic planes flying over and all these different demonstrations. And there's many unique ways that people are looking to honor those who made the ultimate sacrifice and honor this portion of history that is so key not only to American history, but really world history. And in one place in particular, there's a big, beautiful cathedral, has a very unique display and how they are honoring this particular moment in time. And I want to take you along with me so we can go check it out. This is such a beautiful cathedral, and this is what's dripping off the side of the building. It is these crocheted poppies in one long tapestry. The poppies in Europe signify the ultimate sacrifice, and this is incredible in how it's set up here, falling off the cathedral like a waterfall. I'm in Notre Dame Church in Carrington, and there is an exhibit here called The Longest Yarn. D-Day was known as the longest day. This exhibit, The Longest Yarn, A Thread Through History, is a representation, an artistic representation of this particular time in history. Let me read this to you. It's 80 meters in 3D representation of 80 years in the 80-day Battle of Normandy before the liberation of Paris. So different artisans knitted and crocheted different scenes that wrap all around this church that show you different important parts of this historic event. I've never seen anything like it, and I can't even conceive the amount of work and inspiration and creativity that it took to create these scenes.
It's hard to show you exactly what this looks like on camera because the glass was protecting all of the different crocheted pieces, but the intricacy of these scenes and how long it likely took someone to conceive them and create them and reflect on them, to think, well, I'm going to show this battle or this scene in this way using my knitting needles. It's just something I didn't expect. And it was really moving in a way that, again, who would have thought that this would be something of a way to pay tribute to those who came to Normandy on this particular day and spent such time in this region. I mean, you see the Higgins boat, you see the people on the shore, you see a Navy vessel. It's just absolutely incredible. So it was important for me to share that with you because we might have a stereotype of the way that we're going to honor the military and what that looks like and what music's going to be played and who's going to participate. You know, I would think of someone who loves to crochet as the prototype of the person that's going to volunteer their time to do a D-Day commemoration. I just would, you know, I would think, by the way, I crocheted once upon a time, and this inspired me to get out the needles again. But, you know, I'd think of that person as like, you know, creating a baby blanket or something to that effect, not necessarily showing a battle scene. And it was so cool and in a way that was totally unexpected. So I wanted to make sure to share that with you. Now we're going to move into just some reflections on this trip. And if you have any questions for our live audience, I'm happy to take those. I saw a few of them that I thought would be also great to address. I want to share with you just one more quick interview. And this comes to the question of how do we preserve these stories? And as I was thinking about the time in Normandy, I was thinking of you and wondering, well, how can I express this when I feel sort of at a loss of words to explain this experience just because it is so overwhelming? That's the word that keeps coming up. It's overwhelming in the facts. It's overwhelming in the logistics. It's overwhelming in the emotion. It's overwhelming physically. It was a physical feat to move between these different areas and walk them and get down into the barracks or into the bunkers and to travel here. It was kind of this experience that captured you in your totality, you know, your emotion, your intellect, your physical self. That's how I would explain this trip. In every single way, it touched you. And I still feel like there's a lot to process. The people that have dedicated their lives to preserving these stories are some of the most interesting people that I met. And they themselves now are their own storyline in Operation Overlord. But they are the keepers of the stories, and they are the ones that now, such a way, these are the ones that know these stories in such a way that they're going to save them for future generations. So I want you to listen to one more person. His name is he'll say it's Michael or Mikey, but it's Michel. And he's the one that founded the D-Day Experience Museum, which was a fantastic place to visit with the entire family because it walks you through exactly what happened when on D-Day. And they also have a plane for you, like I don't know how to, a simulation. It's an actual plane that the paratroopers would have used. It's inside a garage-like structure, and you walk in and experience what it would be like to sit on the plane, and then the plane gets hit by fire and sort of crashes in a farm field, and you get to experience that. This is the sort of interactive exhibits that they have. So I would have loved to take video of that, but I wasn't quite sure how they would feel about that. And actually it was good because later I was able to meet the founders, and they showed us a part of the museum that has not been released yet. It's being released today for the very first time, so I could talk about it. But I want you're going to recognize some of the names that are mentioned here, and I think it will delight you. So let's go ahead and just take a quick listen.
Your first and last name?
Michel Dutré, but in the States they call me Mike.
Perfect. Can you just tell me a little bit about where we are right now?
We are standing at D-Day Experience Museum in Saint-Côme-du-Mont. That's right in the heart of the battlefield of the 101st Airborne at the Utah Beach sector of the landing of D-Day.
Are you from here? Are you from this area?
No, I'm from Belgium. I was born and raised in Belgium.
So how did you come here to build this museum?
I've always been fascinated by the 101st Airborne. When I was a kid, we used to play war with other kids, you know, at that time you could do that. And I had military equipment that I collected from, it was left from the war in my house. My parents collected, my grandparents, and I had a canteen. On the canteen there was a name, Goose. So when my friend naturally called me Goose when we were playing war. And when I was 18, I wanted to know who was Goose. So I flew to the States, went to New York, opened the phone book and looked at Goose, but there was 3 pages of Goose. I said, oh my God, I'm never gonna find him. I was a little bit, I was young, 18 years old. I figure, okay, I'll open the book and I'm gonna find him. That didn't happen, but I did find him years after, about maybe 10 years later, I found him. And it happened, he was one of the Bena brothers, the famous paratrooper that Spielberg put in his HBO series. So he wasn't famous at the time yet, but he became famous when Spielberg put the series on.
And that was just a coincidence.
That was a coincidence. It was Forrest Gump. And then we became family. He just came to my house many times. I went to visit him many times. He donated all his uniforms, and he was he didn't remember where he lost his canteen, but it's his name on it. It's the same name as this name tag, so no doubt is his. So I got involved in the 101st Airborne reunions and stuff, and then the Utah Beach sector, and the collection grew up. We worked for Steven Spielberg, for Brenda Brothers, and we worked for Saving Private Ryan, consulting, supplying uniforms. And I always had an idea of make a museum. So we did the museum here on the herds of the battlefield of the 101st Airborne Division. That's how it happened.
Can you talk me through from your perspective, because we all see things from our vantage point. So I'm seeing them as an American, and I have an understanding of why World War II was important. But can you explain why it's important to you, why it resonates with you so deeply about what these service members did and why it mattered?
Well, it always fascinated me that an American civilian, at the time they were civilians, 18, 19 years old, enlisted in the army to liberate a country of the other side of the world. It just fascinated me because I was always feeling, I would never do that. Oh, this guy did that, and why? So I started searching and meeting a lot of veterans, asking why they did it and how they did it. And I started writing books about it. I wrote 14 books. And that's always captivated me, what was the motivation to liberate us from the Nazi.
Now that we're marking 80 years of D-Day, what comes to mind when you think about this anniversary and what you've learned over so many years? What would you like to share with people about this story?
Well, around here, everybody and the authority are asking, what about the commemoration after all the veterans are gone? And most of the D-Day veterans are gone. So the veteran we're seeing around here for the 80th anniversary, they're a little bit later combat veterans from PTO, from the Pacific, or guys that were at the Battle of the Bulge. But D-Day veterans, they're getting very, very old and not able to travel. So what's next when they all be gone? And we found out that there is a special relation we create now with the families. Matter of fact, with the display we're doing over here with the 2nd Naval Beach Battalion, we will have 150 family members of the veteran of the unit coming just to see the display and celebrate the 80th anniversary, which is, I find amazing that they just want to travel to do that.
Think about the different chain of events that had to happen. Mike's younger self is playing with just artifacts that the family has around its house. Like, oh, there's a canteen. I don't know who it belongs to. Oh, it's this guy named Guth. Let me show you what Guth looks like. Let me see if I could pull it up. There's a few different pages I have here. This is Forrest Guth. So here's Forrest Guth. Oh, there's a canteen. Oh, I'm kind of curious about the name on this canteen. I'm going to fly to New York and see if I could find this guy. can't find him. But then eventually I do. Then it turns out that this guy he's kind of famous. He's part of one of the most famous military groups that was part of D-Day. Oh, and there's been books written about this Band of Brothers group. And then Steven Spielberg is going to do a whole series on it. And then I'm going to write 17 books and start a museum on D-Day. I mean, think about that. That all came from the canteen that the family just sort of had in their house in Belgium. No one knows how it ended up there. That's where you have to believe in something bigger than yourself, because there's just no way of explaining how those things come together. But the exhibit that you were seeing there in the background, it was super interesting because I haven't been to a museum where the exhibit wasn't done. All the glass was on the floor. There was all these artifacts all over the place. The 2nd Naval Beach Battalion in D-Day was a group of about 450 guys. And what is the belief about this particular group that hasn't gotten a lot of attention until this kind of lately, and especially because of the work of the D-Day Experience Museum collecting their stories, is that they are the precursor for what we now refer to as the Navy SEALs. So they have this huge exhibit that they're putting together with all the different relics. And I mean, just amazing artifacts, from torpedoes to knives to notebooks to letter. I mean, it's incredible. And so this is the individual that's behind collecting all of that to make sure that we keep it somewhere. As I was talking to some locals about the D-Day events, there was some frustration. Obviously, their lives were greatly disrupted, even though many of them were very much attached to the history of the area. They still were frustrated by the traffic and by what happened. And there was one sideways comment about this museum, because it's kind of a newer museum and it's a little flashy. And so there was kind of this sideways comment about, like, those guys, those fancy guys making a bunch of money, like kind of that sort of thing. And I had just done this interview where I was able to see these people face to face and see their passion for it. And so it sort of jolted me, because that wasn't my impression at all. I did have that impression, though, in Normandy, where there was a conflicting feeling between celebrating those memories of D-Day and capitalizing on it in a way that felt uncomfortable. And I really had to examine that myself, because, for example, I went to the World War II Museum in New Orleans. There's a gift shop. I shopped at that gift shop. I got some things for my kids. I was part of capitalizing on World War II, right? I was buying something. It was the commercial process around this museum that's really dedicated to so many people who made the ultimate sacrifice. So I did that. I engaged in that. So what was my problem? That's what I wanted to know. Like, why do I have such an attitude about this? What was going on? And it was because there were moments like this. And this was shot on a cell phone video. I want to show this to you. This was in a grocery store nearby. We had to stop because we were staying at an Airbnb, and there's these postcards, and they show the soldiers. It shows the American cemetery, the gravestones, and then right next to it is bags of chips, and right next to that are a bunch of wine bottles with D-Day commemoration labels on it. At a gas station that we stopped by, like any gas station you might see in America, I looked around suddenly and I thought, oh my gosh, look at all of these souvenirs you could buy: hats and jackets and bags and mugs and tumblers. And there's a part of that people want to feel connected. So maybe they do want a hat that says D-Day on it. My husband had to buy a hat because he lost his. So there is part of it that feels okay. That also is a part of having a souvenir that you want to engage with it. And I don't want to beget anyone that. The part in the grocery store where you had the picture of the cemetery next to the wine did not sit well with me. And there's so much money, it seems, from the impression that I had, being made off of this anniversary, off of this event. It's become its own economic engine in the area in a way that I wasn't expecting. There are so many people that feel emotionally attached, that have these stories, these family connections. So I don't want to mix the two of those. There's real feeling and a real sentiment that feels good and solid and honors the memory. There's another part of it that feels a little off, quite frankly. I wasn't sure I was going to share this story, but we were by Omaha Beach. We were with JD, And he wanted to show us an area across a field. There's no one on the road. There's no one. It's like completely empty. It's a back road. There was like a German position. He wanted to show my husband, combat veteran. They wanted to go see this and nerd out over this particular area. And there was sort of the officials that were setting up for the event for the D-Day anniversary. That was going to happen in a few days, but no one was there. It was like, maybe 3 or 4 people, and the field was open. It's completely open. There's no gates or anything like that. It's just an open, big field. And we started to walk towards this area, and we got stopped as the official said, well, you can't walk there. It's very dangerous. And we looked at him and, we just talked about the Omaha Beach landing and the invasion. My husband's a combat veteran who served the country. And there's all this celebration about American soldiers, but they were worried about our safety walking across this field. And he didn't allow us to do it. And it was at a moment where I got fired up as the white, I wanted to tell him, I was like, this is what's going on. Like, the American soldiers came in here. You got to let my husband walk, because it was emotional. It was emotional to have that sort of experience and be confronted with that. Like, okay, so you want us to spend the money in the town and bring our families here and invest in this area, invest in this experience, but you also kind of want to do it in a way that sometimes doesn't feel exactly hospitable. And there were portions of that. And I don't think that's a cultural thing. I know there's a lot of stereotypes about Americans and French, and sometimes there's conflict. There was a part that it seemed there was the advantageousness of capitalizing off of this commemoration, this sort of definitely people making money off of it. And they should be able to do that. They're in a historic area. But then there were certain interactions that took place that felt off. And that was a reflection that I wasn't quite sure how to process, because I was emotional, because I was looking at the stories of these people that died. And that was what was in front of me on that particular day. I sort of had a hard time sifting through, like, well, who am I judging? And how should I really be feeling about this? And overall, the experience was wonderful. But there were just a couple moments that just felt a little bit off. And I didn't feel comfortable with that, of these some other people, and perhaps not as connected as some of these other families, making an entire business off of the death and destruction that happened on D-Day, with the wine bottles and the keychains and certain things like that, So I don't know what you think about that, but I'd be curious your thoughts, because there's a fine line there, and sometimes it moves depending on your state of mind on that particular day. And perhaps that's what I was feeling. Maybe I was in that tired mom mode where my tolerance for anything was much, much lower. When we got back to Paris, where we were flying out, we spent the night in Paris. And that's where I actually got emotional. We were at the Eiffel Tower. I was looking at all these people, and I was thinking about this city that was totally overrun by Nazis, completely overrun by Nazis. I mean, there was points of World War II where there was a lot of talk about negotiating with Hitler, not defeating him. And I'm looking across this beautiful city. I mean, Paris is a stunning city, and it was finally like nice weather for the first time for us. And you saw this amazing city, all these people visiting the Eiffel Tower, all these families from all over the world. And I got emotional just standing there thinking none of this would be possible. It would not have been possible except for these specific soldiers that said, yes, I'm going to go. And not all of them volunteered. In fact, the majority of them did not. But they went anyways. They were drafted. It was their duty, and they had moral clarity on who the enemy was. And so they did it. And they liberated an entire country, and then the rest of Europe. That's what they did. There's no, well, they sort of, no. That's what they did. They jumped out of an airplane into a country they've never been before to confront an enemy that wasn't on their own soil, because they wanted to make sure to free these people that were there, that were living under this horrible oppression, because liberty matters. And so that's really the moment where I was reflecting on what I was able to do, what I'm able to do right now, a free press, live in a free country. This is not possible except for sacrifice. And it's not possible without a fight. It's not a negotiation. They're not a negotiating freedom. You either have it or you don't. One of my colleagues sent me this story today, and this will be our final point. It was a story of a World War II U.S. Navy veteran traveling to France for the 80th anniversary of D-Day. He was 102 years old, and he died. He had a medical emergency aboard the ship that he was on heading to Europe, and he died. And as I was looking at the faces of all the different veterans that were and are present in Normandy on this particular day, on this anniversary, I was thinking about what an effort it took to bring them there. But we're bringing them there because they're honored there. In America, there's no celebration. I'm in Texas. We like American flags in Texas. There's no American flags out for D-Day. In order to get the recognition, these veterans have to go to Normandy. They're 100 plus years old and they're traveling to Normandy to get the gratitude for what they did. Why don't we do that here? Thinking of the economics of it, let's do that here. Why are we not celebrating the 101st Airborne, the 82nd Airborne? Why are we not celebrating these stories here? Why aren't there events for our children to attend here? We should do that because it's the cost and the stakes that we need to internalize. And maybe that's why, coming full circle, we don't have that deeper knowledge of this day. The Nazis weren't here. We didn't have to worry about sharing our house with them. So it's not as personal, but it is personal because we gave our lives there. So that's what I'm left with wondering. How do we take what we're doing in Normandy and do it here so that there's a tie, an umbilical cord that runs between the experience in Normandy. But for those of us who can't travel there, again, I just went on sort of a whim that wasn't necessarily planned to have that experience. The World War II Museum in New Orleans is a must visit. Absolutely. 100%. Absolutely must visit. And there you might feel some of what I'm talking about. But, look at how they're treated. Look at how our veterans are treated in a different country and think about, what are we doing today? I'm grateful for your time today because I know that you care and that you wanted to learn more about this. And I wanted to learn more about it too. And so thank you for inspiring that and for the gift of knowledge that hopefully will to come. And then we tell our children. One of you asked a question about whether or not it would be a good idea to bring your children to Normandy, 7 and 10 years old. I believe the ages were. This is advice I'd give to anybody. Normandy is spectacular. There are so many different places to go. We stayed in a little barn, a 18th century barn. It dates back to at least the 1700s. And it was refurbished to become kind of an apartment. And my children were able to see the French farmland. They understood what we were talking about, but we really needed to take them aside many times to give them the depth of what had transpired because they're kids. And because the land doesn't feel dark and it doesn't feel somber, I understand why they didn't necessarily sometimes pick up on that. And so we really had to look them in the eye and say, listen, this is what happened here and this is why it matters. So my children are 9, just turned 8 and 4. The 4-year-old actually was great. I'll be curious if he remembers anything of this trip, probably not. But we have the pictures, so we will remind him. I think anyone that has the opportunity to go to Normandy should go. I think you need to give yourself more time than you think and to try to hook up with people that understand the land. I think it's always good to have a tour guide. We had JD, who's just a friend of ours. I think any age, this is worth the trip. Tack it on to going to Paris and going to see the Eiffel Tower and then take a drive out there I think you could do a lot in 3 days. I think you could do a lot. You'd be moving around a lot, but you could do a lot. You could spend months there and not get through the end of it. So highly suggested. And I would not go around the anniversary. I would go a couple weeks before or maybe in early September. It can get a little hot in Normandy. Not all the places there have air conditioning. So I'm just doing that to save you a little discomfort. I'm going to leave you with one quick soundbite. I'm going to say goodbye here, but I want you to also hear this soundbite. Let me get it kind of set up for you. Watching the commemoration on the screen today and seeing all the different important people that came into Normandy was a spectacular feat. To see so many world leaders celebrate D-Day and celebrate the veterans that remain with us and want to tell this story. But Normandy in the early evening, where the sun is still in the sky and French families bring out their food to the beach and sort of sit on the beach eating sandwiches and seeing the water ahead of you is how I hope you will see Normandy someday, because that will give you the bandwidth to reflect on the lives lost and the lives forever changed by Operation Overlord that changed the course of American and world history. So thank you for coming on this journey with me and for hanging with me for these different segments. I really appreciate it. There'll be more to come. One of the questions I'm asking now is, how did what happened in D-Day impact our foreign policy in the ways that we're behaving now? There was the American military before D-Day, and there was the American military after. There was the American military before World War II, and then there was the American military after. How did the events in this particular time in history change our equation or a calculation about what we're able to do using the military and what we're not? This was some of what was mentioned in some of the speeches that were given today, but it feels too political, and I don't want to do anything politically related today. But it is one of the questions that I'm asking. How does this event also impact the paradigm in which we're seeing the world and what we believe we're capable of? Because that's the belief of being able to liberate people and to bring freedom to different places comes from events like this one, because it's real. But what are the limits and what are the circumstances when you use that power and use it in the right way? So I'll be reflecting on that. But I look forward to visiting with you more, sharing more stories from overseas and also here at home as we continue to develop quick, concise, nonpartisan information. I want to share with you the invocation, the prayer that kicked off really the ceremony today on June 6, 2024, 80 years after D-Day. I'll leave you with these words.
Let us bow our heads in humble reverence and solemn remembrance. Let us pray. God, when you needed someone to defend freedom, you made a soldier. When you needed someone to fight tyranny, you created a Marine. When you needed someone to protect the skies, you made an airman. When you needed someone to guard the seas, you made the sailor. And to patrol the shores, the Coast Guard. When you needed to send someone brave and true, it has always been and always will be the men and women of the armed forces. When the world needed heroes, you called the greatest generation to courage, and their answer still echoes in the soul of the nation. Shine your eternal light upon those whose gravestones encircle us as silent sentinels, reminding us of the price of liberty. Comfort with your abiding presence those who mourn empty tables and empty chairs, of those who gave their best hopes for our brighter tomorrows. Be our witness, O God, as we stand on this hallowed ground, consecrated in blood, that we will be devoted to the preservation of peace with the same determination as these here who fought fourscore years ago. As storm clouds gather on the horizon once again, rise up, O God, the next greatest generation, to meet every challenge with an unbreakable resolve to do what is right and good in your sight. Not counting the cost, but weighing the unfinished work of freedom, a vision where all people can pursue the life to which you have created them. May it be so, I pray, in your holy name. Amen and amen.